29 surnames. That's all it takes for a computer algorithm to identify Jews in America with 70 to 92% accuracy. No interviews, no DNA samples, no census data, just a list of names your grandparents might have carried across an ocean. The same list that grocery chains use to figure out where to stock kosher chicken. The same list that pharmaceutical companies use to screen volunteers for genetic disease trials. The same list that tech companies feed into AI models to understand Jewish authorship patterns. Your last name isn't just your family's label anymore. It's a data point, a demographic marker, a probability calculation running in the background of 1,000 corporate databases you've never heard of. But here's what the algorithms don't tell you. That list of 29 names represents maybe 15% of American Jews. The rest of us, the 85% with names that don't trigger the software, we're invisible to the very systems designed to find us. And that invisibility isn't random. It's the endpoint of 2 centuries of deliberate erasure, forced assimilation, and bureaucratic violence that started in the throne rooms of European emperors and ended in the Soviet passport offices where your great-grandfather traded Rabinovich for Roberts. 3 things you'll know by the end of this. First, why the most stereotypically Jewish-sounding surnames in existence were invented by German civil servants who'd never met a Jew. Second, how a surname that guarantees you're Jewish according to every database can simultaneously guarantee you're not, depending on which century and which empire we're talking about. And third, why the single most reliable way to confirm Jewish ancestry through a name is to find the moment when that name stops appearing in records altogether. We're going backwards through time, starting with the algorithm, ending with the reason it fails. A marketing team at Publix, that's a supermarket chain in Florida, runs into a problem around 2015. They've got distribution centers that can stock kosher products, but kosher sections don't sell equally everywhere. Stock them wrong, lose money on spoilage. Stock them right, dominate a high-value niche market. Traditional solution: hire a survey company, spend $100,000 mapping Jewish population density block by block. But there's a cheaper way. A demographer named Ira Sheskin, working out of the University of Miami, hands them a shortcut. Feed a list of surnames into a property database. Cross-reference with residential addresses. Generate a heat map. No surveys needed. The list has 29 names: Cohen, Levy, Friedman, Kaplan, Goldstein, Rosenberg, Shapiro, Katz, Schwartz, Stein, Levine, Bernstein, Rubin, Rosen, Klein, Hoffman, Greenberg, Schneider, Weiss, Goldberg, Berman, Miller, Adler, Horowitz, Epstein, Silverman, Goodman, Weinstein, Cohn. Run that list through Miami-Dade County real estate records and you get clusters. Aventura, Bal Harbor, Pinecrest. The algorithm doesn't care about synagogue membership, doesn't care about self-identification. It counts names and builds probability curves. 70% of people with these surnames identify as Jewish in census surveys. In some zip codes, it pushes past 90%. So Publix stocks the kosher chicken accordingly. Revenue goes up. The algorithm works. The method isn't new. Samuel Coase, a psychologist and Jewish community activist, published the first version in 1942 under a different pressure. American Jewish organizations needed population estimates for political advocacy, but couldn't ask quote, _0 on any official form. Anti-discrimination law, ironically, made Jews invisible to their own demographers. So Coase built the list, counted surnames in phone books, cross-referenced with synagogue rolls, derived percentages. By the 1980s, researchers were using updated versions to study everything from voting patterns to disease prevalence. If you've got a surname on that list and you've ever wondered why you keep getting targeted ads for birthright trips or genetic testing companies looking for Tay-Sachs carriers, this is why. You're in the database. You've always been in the database. But the math has a hole in it, a catastrophic one. Sheskin himself admits it in his papers. The distinctive Jewish names method is Ashkenazi-centric to the point of uselessness for anyone whose ancestors did come from Eastern Europe. Sephardic Jews, the ones who spent centuries in Spain, Portugal, North Africa, the Ottoman Empire, don't appear. Mizrahi Jews from Iraq, Iran, Yemen, invisible. Mountain Jews from the Caucasus with surnames like Davidov, gone. Bukharian Jews with names absorbed from Persian and Tajik cultures, erased. The algorithm looks at a Rodriguez, a Toledano, a Mizrahi, a Sassoon, and sees nothing. Not because these families aren't Jewish, because the list was built from Ellis Island manifests and 1940s Brooklyn phone books. It's a snapshot of one migration wave, frozen in code, now running on autopilot in corporate marketing departments. And even within the Ashkenazi population, the list is bleeding accuracy with every generation. Intermarriage rates above 70% in the United States mean that the children of Goldsteins are now Johnsons. The children of Friedmans are Martins. The algorithm still sees the old man at the retirement home. It doesn't see his grandkids. So where did these 29 names come from? Not from Moses, not from Abraham, from a filing cabinet in Vienna. 1787, Habsburg Emperor Joseph II issues a decree that will rewrite Jewish identity across Central Europe. Every Jew in the empire must adopt a fixed, inheritable surname within 6 months, no exceptions. The reasoning is administrative, not theological. You can't tax people you can't track. You can't conscript soldiers from families that change their names every generation. The traditional Jewish naming system, patronymics, the son of, daughter of formula, doesn't fit European bureaucracy. Moshe ben Avraham becomes a different person than his son Avraham ben Moshe. No consistency across generations, no way to maintain property records or draft rolls. So the emperor sends out commissions. Civil servants, mostly German-speaking, mostly Christian, mostly bored out of their minds, set up tables in town squares across Galicia, Moravia, Bohemia. They call in every Jewish family. Name? The scribe writes it down, but not the name the family's been using, a new one, German style. Surname first, permanent, heritable through the male line. Some families get to choose. If you've got money, and the Habsburgs make this explicit in the implementation guidelines, you can buy a pleasant-sounding name. Rosenberg, Field of Roses. Blumenthal, Valley of Flowers. Goldstein, Goldstone. These are expensive. These cost bribes. These go to the families who can afford to walk into the commission office with a purse heavy enough to make the scribe smile. The poor get what the scribe feels like giving them. And the scribes, to be clear, are not friends of the Jewish community. They're low-level bureaucrats working on commission, paid per name processed, and they've been doing this for 12 hours straight in the August heat. So they get creative. Title bomb, date palm. Sounds nice until you realize it's a biblical reference they're assigning like livestock branding. Ochsenschwanz, oxtail. That's a real surname given to real families. Esselskop, donkey head. Walk into a registry office as Chaim the tailor, walk out as Mr. Donkeyhead, and your sons and their sons will carry that name until someone has the money and the legal standing to change it. The German suffixes everyone associates with Jewish names, Stein, Berg, Baum, Feld, Tal. These aren't Jewish linguistic markers, they're German landscape terms. Stone, mountain, tree, field, valley. The scribes are literally assigning geographic features as surnames because that's the system they know from their own culture. A German Christian named Steinberg got his name because his ancestors lived near a stony mountain. A Galician Jew named Steinberg got his because a Habsburg clerk in 1791 had processed 40 families that day and was running out of ideas. The irony is rich enough to choke on. The surnames that algorithms now use to identify Jews are the surnames that were forced onto Jews by a Christian empire that needed to make them legible for exploitation. The names aren't Jewish, the system is. The Russian Empire watches the Habsburgs and takes notes. 1804, Tsar Alexander I issues a similar decree. All Jews in the Pale of Settlement must take fixed surnames. The implementation is slower, messier, more violent. In some towns, the process happens in 1804. In others, it drags into the 1820s. In the eastern provinces, it doesn't finish until the 1840s. The variation creates chaos in genealogical records. Brothers end up with different surnames because they registered in different years in different towns under different clerks. And the Russian clerks are worse than the Habsburgs. At least the Austrians were running a bureaucracy. The Russians are running a shakedown. Rich Jews buy Russian-sounding names to blend in. Slavic patronymics, Ovich, Ovsky suffixes. Ivanov, Petrov, Sokolov. They're trying to disappear into the majority population. It works for exactly one generation, until the pogroms of 1881, when the mobs go door to door checking circumcisions, and your surname stops mattering. Poor Jews get the dregs. Biblical names Russified into something unpronounceable. Occupational names that mark them as outsiders. And here's where it gets linguistically twisted. Some families keep their Hebrew origin names, but transliterate them into Cyrillic characters, creating surnames that look Russian on paper, but sound Hebrew when spoken. Rabinovich, son of the rabbi, looks Slavic, isn't. Prussia joins in. 1812, same playbook. Fixed surnames, registration commissions, bribes for good names. The Prussian twist, they're more efficient, the lists are cleaner, the records survive, which means that German Jewish genealogy in the 19th century is weirdly easier to trace than Russian Jewish genealogy, not because the Jews kept better records, but because the Prussian state did. 3 empires, 50 years of rolling implementation, millions of people forced to abandon a naming system that had worked for 3,000 years, and the result is the list of 29 surnames that an algorithm now uses to stock grocery stores in Florida. But the surnames themselves encode information if you know how to read them. They're not random. They follow patterns, morphological structures, 6 major types. First, status names. These are the only surnames that predate the forced registration era because they come from religious roles that were already hereditary. Cohen, Kagan, Katz, an acronym for Kohen Tzedek, righteous priest. Kaplan, variations on the same root, descendants of the priestly class that served in the temple in Jerusalem before the Romans burned it in 70 CE. You can't buy your way into these names. You're born into them or you're not. The priesthood passed father to son, which means that even now, 2,000 years after the temple's destruction, genetic studies show that men with Cohen-derived surnames share Y chromosome markers at rates far higher than random chance. The name actually predicts the DNA. Same with Levite surnames. Levin, Leviton, Siegel, an acronym for Sigan Levia, Levite assistant. The Levites were the temple support staff, one rung below the priests, also hereditary. Genetic studies show the same thing. Levite surname carriers cluster around specific Y chromosome haplogroups. The name is a genetic flag. Then there are the rabbinic acronyms. Marshak, Morenu Harav Shmuel Kaidanover, our teacher, Rabbi Shmuel Kaidanover. The whole surname is a title compressed into syllables. Roshel, Rosh Shol, head of the question, a rabbinic judge. Sachs, probably from Zach, an acronym for Zera Kodesh Shemo. His name is Holy Seed, a title for descendants of martyred scholars. These names function like academic degrees embedded into family identity. They tell you this family produced religious authority, possibly still does. Second category, toponyms, place names, where the family came from before the registration commissions scattered them. Shapiro, from Speyer, a city in the Rhineland. Epstein, from Epstein, a town near Frankfurt. Gordon, possibly from Grodno, a city in Belarus. Brodsky, from Brody, Galicia. Warszawski, Warsaw. Lubarsky, Lublin. These names are migration records embedded in syllables. If your surname is a toponym, you can trace your family's movement backward by finding the city. Then you check the city's archival records. Sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes you find a metrical book that survived the Second World War and lists every Jewish birth in that town from 1800 to 1940. But here's the trap. A toponym doesn't mean your family originated in that place. It means they passed through it long enough to be registered there. The registration might have happened 5 years after they arrived. The registration might have happened the day before they left. A family named Warszawski might never have lived in Warsaw. They might have been from a village 50 miles away and only went to Warsaw because that's where the registration office was. Third, occupational names. These split into 2 linguistic layers depending on whether the family was assimilated enough to use the imperial language or still operating primarily in Yiddish and Hebrew. Melamed, Hebrew for teacher, specifically a teacher of young children in Torah fundamentals. Shkolnik, Yiddish for teacher, same job, different language, tells you which community the family moved in. Chayat, Hebrew for tailor. Schneider, German for tailor. Portnov, Russian for tailor. Same occupation, 3 different empires, 3 different names. If you've got Schneider, your family was registered in a German-speaking territory. If you've got Portnov, you're looking at the Russian Empire. The surname is an imperial map. Sofer, scribe, the guy who handwrites Torah scrolls, a sacred and highly skilled profession. Sandler, Yiddish for shoemaker. Reznik, Yiddish for butcher, specifically a kosher butcher, because the term implies knowledge of Jewish slaughter law. These aren't just job descriptions, they're social positions. A butcher in a Jewish community isn't just selling meat. He's the guy who determines whether your food is kosher. That's power. That's trust. The surname marks the family as integrated into the religious economy of the shtetl. Fourth, patronymics and matronymics that survived the transition. Davidovich, Abramovich, Moiseyev, son of David, son of Abraham, son of Moses. These are the families that managed to keep one foot in the old system while complying with the new one. The ovich suffix is Slavic, but the root is Hebrew. It's a hybrid, a compromise. And then there are the matronymics, which are rarer and more interesting. Rivkin, from Rivka, Rebecca. Sorkin, from Sarah. Perlman, from Pearl, a Yiddish female name meaning pearl. When you see a matronymic surname, you're looking at a family that broke patrilineal convention, usually because the mother was the prominent figure, either widowed and running a business or from a rabbinic dynasty important enough that her sons took her family name to claim the lineage. Fifth category, artificial ornamental names. These are the ones that make people think of Jewish surnames as inherently flowery or precious, and they're a perfect case study in how forced assimilation works. Goldstein, Goldberg, Goldblum, Goldfarb, Goldwasser, Goldstone, Gold Mountain, Goldflower, Gold Color, Gold Water. None of these names have anything to do with Jewish tradition. They're products of German Romantic aesthetics in the late 18th century. Nature imagery was fashionable. Precious metals were aspirational. The naming commissions assigned these names to Jews who could pay for them, and the Jews accepted them because they sound respectable. Respectable in German terms, not Jewish terms. Same with floral names. Rosenblum, Rosenfeld, Rosenberg, Blumenthal, Blumenfeld, Roseflower, Rosefield, Rose Mountain, Flower Valley, Flower Field. Pretty, bourgeois, completely disconnected from any Jewish naming tradition that existed before 1787. The cruelest part, these are the names everyone recognizes as Jewish now. The algorithm sees Rosenberg and flags it. The HR manager sees Goldstein on a resume and makes assumptions. But the names themselves are Christian European inventions assigned to Jews as a compliance tax. The marker of Jewishness is the mark of forced assimilation. Sixth, the garbage category. The names that were assigned as insults or as clerical errors or as random syllable combinations when the scribe ran out of patience. Schwartz, black, common enough in German-speaking populations that it means nothing by itself, but when combined with Jewish registration records, it's often a descriptor. Dark hair, dark complexion, slapped on as a surname because the clerk couldn't be bothered. Gross, big, same thing. A physical description frozen into a family name. And then the true junk names. Klamberg
compromises the integrity of the entire system.
doesn't mean anything. It's a sound-alike corruption of something that might have meant something in Yiddish 3 generations ago, or might have been a transcription error when a Polish clerk tried to write down a Hebrew name in German characters and failed. Hundreds of these. Thousands. Families carrying names that were misspellings, that were jokes, that were the 19th century equivalent of a bureaucrat slamming random keys on a keyboard. Now here's where the algorithm dies. Because everything I just told you assumes that the surname stayed stable. It didn't. The Russian Revolution happens, 1917. The Bolsheviks take power and immediately start dismantling the old imperial identity system. Jews in the Soviet Union are no longer confined to the Pale of Settlement. They can move to Moscow, Leningrad. They can join the Communist Party. They can become engineers, doctors, military officers. All they have to do is stop being visibly Jewish, so they change their names, voluntarily, legally. The Soviet passport system allows it. Rabinovich becomes Ivanov. Goldstein becomes Volkov. Shapiro becomes Petrov. One generation, one signature on a government form. The surname that would have made you identifiable to an algorithm in 2015 vanishes in 1928. The process accelerates in the 1930s during Stalin's purges and again in the late 1940s during the anti-cosmopolitan campaigns. Soviet euphemism for state-sponsored anti-Semitism. If you've got a Jewish surname and you're trying to get into a university, good luck. If you've got a Jewish surname and you're applying for a Communist Party position, you're done. So people change them. Fathers change them for their children. Mothers change them during divorces and remarriages. Families fracture across surname lines. Brothers end up with different last names because one changed it in 1931 and the other didn't. The records are chaos. Soviet internal passport archives are half destroyed, half classified, half contradictory. You find a birth certificate from 1925 listing a child as Rabinovich, then a school record from 1933 listing the same child as Sokolov, then a military draft card from 1941 listing him as Volkov. 3 names, same person. No legal documentation of the changes in between because the changes happened informally, through bribes, through bureaucratic favors, through marriages that were never properly recorded. The German Wehrmacht invades in 1941. The Einsatzgruppen follow behind the front lines with lists. They're looking for Jews. The lists are compiled from Soviet census data, from local informants, from synagogue membership rolls. Surnames are one filter, not the only filter. The Nazis checked identity papers, checked circumcision status, checked grandparents' nationalities, but surnames were a starting point. If you had a recognizably Jewish surname in Ukraine in 1942, you died. If you'd changed it in 1935, maybe you didn't. The survivors carry that calculation forward. After the war, the Soviet Union continues restricting Jewish advancement. The 5th line of the internal passport, the nationality line, still says Jew, regardless of your surname. But the surname is what people see first on a job application. So, more changes, more erasures. By 1970, a substantial percentage of Soviet Jews have surnames that give no indication of their ancestry. The algorithm would miss them completely. Then, 1991, the Soviet Union collapses. Emigration opens. 1 million Soviet Jews leave for Israel, the United States, Germany. They bring their changed names with them. Ivanov, Petrov, Volkov, Sokolov, Russian surnames with no Jewish etymology whatsoever, carried by families who are halakhically Jewish, who have Jewish mothers and Jewish grandmothers, who can prove unbroken matrilineal descent back 5 generations, but whose surnames were selected specifically to hide that descent. The algorithm sees them and sees nothing. Now apply the same process to America. Different mechanism, same result. Ellis Island, 1890 to 1924. 12 million immigrants pass through. The immigration clerks are processing thousands of people a day. They don't speak Yiddish. They don't speak Russian. They don't speak Polish. They hear a name. They write down what it sounds like in English characters. Rabinovich becomes Rabinowitz. Robinson, Robbins, Roberts. 4 different spellings, 4 different families in the records, same origin. Or the immigrant does it himself. He gets off the boat, He sees the signs in English. He realizes his surname is unpronounceable to Americans, and he changes it before he even files his first citizenship paperwork. Horowitz becomes Harris. Levy becomes Lee. Stein becomes Stone. Legal, simple, patriotic even. He's assimilating. He's becoming American. The surname that would have identified him to a database algorithm in 2015 is gone by 1913. Second-generation assimilation compounds it. The children of immigrants anglicize further. They want to escape the ethnic ghettos. They want corporate jobs. They want to marry outside the community. A Jewish surname is a barrier, so they change it, legally, through the courts. Greenberg becomes Green. Goldstein becomes Gold. Silverman becomes Silver. The etymology is still there if you squint, but the algorithm isn't squinting. It's doing exact string matches. Or they change it completely. Rabinovich becomes Roberts. Shapiro becomes Shaw. Kaplan becomes Taylor. No linguistic connection at all. The family erases itself from the database in one generation. By 2015, when the Publix marketing team runs the distinctive Jewish names algorithm, they're finding the families who didn't change their names, the ones who stayed in Jewish neighborhoods or who didn't face enough discrimination to bother, or who took pride in the surname despite the stigma. 15% of American Jews, maybe 20%. The rest are invisible. And that's just the Ashkenazi population that the algorithm was designed to find. It was never looking for Sephardim. Sephardic surnames follow completely different rules because they come from completely different empires. The Spanish and Portuguese Jews who were expelled in 1492 didn't go through a Habsburg registration process. They already had surnames. Iberian surnames, Christian-sounding surnames because they'd been living in Christian kingdoms for centuries. Perez, Lopez, Rodriguez, Garcia, Alvarez. These are common Spanish surnames. They're also common Sephardic Jewish surnames. A Perez in Madrid in 1480 might have been Christian. A Perez in Salonika in 1500 was probably Jewish, because Salonika is where the expelled Spanish Jews resettled under Ottoman protection. Same surname, different religion, different continent, and absolutely no way for an algorithm to tell the difference without additional context. Toledano, from Toledo. Sound like a toponym. Is a toponym. But it doesn't tell you the family's religion. It tells you they came from Toledo before the expulsion. Could be Jewish, could be converso. Jewish ancestry but Christian conversion under threat of death. Could be Christian who moved to North Africa for trade and happened to have the same name as a Jewish family. The surname is ambiguous by design. The whole point was to blend in. Then you get the Sephardic families that moved into the Ottoman Empire and took on Turkish, Greek, or Arabic influences. Masri, Mizrahi, Shemtov, Abu Hatzera. These names don't appear on any Ashkenazi list. They don't sound German. They don't sound Slavic. They don't end in Berg or Stein. They're invisible to the algorithm, not because the families aren't Jewish, but because the algorithm was built from Brooklyn phone books and Ellis Island manifests. It never looked east or south. Mizrahi Jews from Iraq, Iran, Yemen, and North Africa have the same problem. Sassoon. Sounds British because the famous Sassoon family anglicized after moving to India and England in the 19th century. But the name is originally from Baghdad. Jewish family, Aramaic-speaking, operating in the Mesopotamian trade networks for 1,000 years before the British Empire existed. The surname tells you nothing unless you know the family history. Kaduri, Abdulaziz, Al-Kabisi. Arabic surnames carried by Jewish families who lived under Arab rule. The names are linguistically indistinguishable from Muslim names because the families were using Arabic as their vernacular. No Hebrew, no Yiddish, no German suffixes. The algorithm looks at these names and categorizes them as Arab because the algorithm doesn't understand that Jewish identity isn't a linguistic monolith. Bukharian Jews from Central Asia took Persian and Tajik names. Davidov, Fuzailov, Pinhasov. These look Russian because of the O suffix, but they're not Russian. They're Russified versions of Hebrew names that were originally pronounced in Persian. A family named Davidov in Bukhara might have unbroken Jewish lineage back to the Babylonian exile in 500 BCE, but the surname itself gives you nothing to work with. It's a linguistic fossil wrapped in 3 layers of imperial bureaucracy. Mountain Jews from Dagestan and Azerbaijan have the same issue. They took local surnames to survive in the Caucasus. If you see a Kavkazi or an Avshalomov in a database, you won't know they're Jewish unless you're specifically familiar with mountain Jewish naming conventions. The algorithm isn't. So the distinctive Jewish names method works for a specific subset of a specific population, Ashkenazi Jews in the United States whose families didn't change their names between 1840 and 1950. That's it. That's the whole coverage area. Everyone else is invisible. Now we get to the verification problem. You've got a surname. Think it might indicate Jewish ancestry. How do you prove it? Step 1. Stop trusting the surname. It's a hypothesis, not evidence. A surname gives you a place to start looking. If you've got cats, you start with the assumption of priestly descent and you look for corroboration. If you've got Brodsky, you start with Brody, Galicia, and you check the town records. If you've got Ivanov, you start with the possibility that it was changed from something else, and you go looking for the original. But you don't stop at the surname, because surnames lie. They lie through clerical errors. They lie through adoptions. They lie through marriages where a wife took her husband's name, or a husband took his wife's name because her family had money. They lie through informal name changes that were never legally recorded. They lie through children born out of wedlock who took their mother's surname. They lie through entire branches of a family tree that got severed during pogroms or deportations or migrations, leaving descendants who carry a name with no memory of where it came from. Step 2. Go to the archival records. This is where the surname becomes useful because it gives you a search term. You start with whatever family documents you have: birth certificates, marriage certificates, death certificates, immigration papers, military draft cards, naturalization records, anything with an official stamp. You're looking for dates, places, and the names of parents. The parents' names are the key. A birth certificate from 1920 might list your grandfather's name as Jacob Rosenberg, born in Minsk. Now you've got 3 pieces of information: a name, a place, a rough time window. That's enough to start searching archival databases. Jewish Gen. This is the first stop for anyone with Eastern European Jewish ancestry. It's a volunteer-run genealogical database that aggregates records from dozens of smaller archives. You plug in a surname and a town, and it searches through digitized vital records, census data, business directories, emigration lists, Holocaust victim databases. If your ancestor left a paper trail anywhere in Eastern Europe between 1800 and 1950, there's a chance it's in Jewish Gen. But the database is incomplete. Entire regions are missing because the records were destroyed. Belarus lost almost everything in the Second World War. Ukraine lost most of its pre-Soviet archives. Poland lost the metrical books for towns that were burned during the Nazi occupation. You search for Rabinovich in Minsk and you might get 50 results, or you might get 0. And the 0 doesn't mean your family wasn't there. It means the records are gone. So you go deeper. You contact the state archives directly. Belarus National Archive, Lithuanian State Historical Archive, Ukraine's Central State Historical Archive. Most of these institutions have online catalogs now. Some of them will digitize records on request for a fee. You send them the surname, the town, the date range, and you wait. Sometimes you get scans of handwritten metrical books in Russian or Polish that you have to translate yourself. Sometimes you get a form letter saying the records don't exist. If your family came through a major city, you've got better odds. Warsaw, Lodz, Vilnius, Odessa. These cities kept more systematic records and more of them survived. If your family came from a village, you're gambling. Villages often didn't keep their own records. They were registered through the nearest town with a government office, and the town might be 10 miles away, and the records might list the village name wrong, or not list it at all. Then there are the synagogue records. Jewish communities kept their own metrical books separate from state records. Births, marriages, deaths, circumcisions, weddings, divorces. These books were written in Hebrew or Yiddish, maintained by the local rabbi or scribe, and stored in the synagogue. Most of them are gone. The Nazis systematically destroyed synagogues across Eastern Europe. The Soviets confiscated religious records and either destroyed them or dumped them in state archives where they sat untouched for 70 years. But some survived. Yad Vashem in Jerusalem has a collection. The Jewish Theological Seminary in New York has a collection. YIVO Institute for Jewish Research has fragments. You search their databases the same way: surname, town, date. You might find a record of your great-great-grandfather's wedding in Yiddish script, written by a rabbi who died in Treblinka. If you're looking at Soviet records, you've got a different problem. The Soviet internal passport system tracked everyone, but the records are still partially classified. The FSB, the modern Russian security service, controls access to a lot of the pre-1991 archives. You can file requests, but approval is arbitrary. Some records have been digitized and made public. Others are sitting in a warehouse in Moscow, and you'll never see them. For families that emigrated to the United States, you've got better infrastructure. Ellis Island has digitized manifests. You can search by name and year of arrival. The manifests list the passenger's age, town of origin, nearest relative in the home country, destination address in America. That's gold. You get a name from the manifest, you trace it back to the town in Europe. You search the European archives for that town. Same with naturalization records. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services has an online genealogy program. You request your ancestor's naturalization file, and you get scans of the original documents: the declaration of intention, the petition for naturalization, the certificate. These files often include the exact village of origin, the name of the ship they arrived on, the names of witnesses who testified to their good character. It's a direct path backward. Census records help. The U.S. Census was taken every 10 years, and the records are public after 72 years. You find your ancestor in the 1930 or 1940 census, and you see where they were living, what they were doing for work, who was living in the household. The 1940 census includes a question about place of birth. If it says Russia or Poland or Austria, you've confirmed immigrant status. If it says New York, you know they were second generation. But all of this is still just confirming the surname. You're not proving Jewish ancestry. You're proving that a person with that surname existed and lived in a place where Jews lived. The actual confirmation of Jewishness requires one of two things: religious documentation or genetic testing. Religious documentation means finding a record that explicitly identifies the person as Jewish: a synagogue membership roll, a Jewish cemetery burial record, a ketubah, a Jewish marriage contract, a moil's record of circumcision, a bar mitzvah certificate, anything that shows participation in Jewish religious life. The problem: most of this documentation is gone. Synagogues didn't keep archives the way churches did. Jewish communal records were informal, maintained by individuals, passed down through families, and lost when the families were destroyed. You might get lucky and find a great-grandfather's name in a Landsmannschaft record, a mutual aid society for immigrants from the same town. But those records are scattered across dozens of small historical societies, and most of them aren't digitized. So you turn to DNA. Autosomal DNA testing through companies like Ancestry DNA or 23andMe can tell you your ethnic breakdown. If you've got Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry, it shows up as a percentage. The test compares your DNA to reference populations and looks for segments that match known Ashkenazi genetic markers. If you're 50% Ashkenazi, one of your parents was Ashkenazi. If you're 25%, one of your grandparents was. The math is clean. But the test can't tell you which grandparent. It can't tell you which surname is the Jewish one. If your 4 grandparents were named Smith, Jones, Kowalski, and Rabinovich, and your DNA test comes back 25% Ashkenazi, you still don't know if it's the Rabinovich line or one of the others. You have to cross-reference with archival records. The test also can't distinguish between Ashkenazi ancestry and Sephardic or Mizrahi ancestry with perfect accuracy, because the reference populations are still being built. Ashkenazi Jews are overrepresented in genetic databases because they've been studied more. Sephardic and Mizrahi populations are underrepresented, so a test might flag you as generically Jewish without specifying which diaspora you're from. Then there are Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA tests, which trace direct paternal and maternal lines. Y DNA passes from father to son unchanged except for random mutations. If you're male, your Y DNA is nearly identical to your father's, your grandfather's, your great-grandfather's, going back dozens of generations. Mitochondrial DNA passes from mother to child and traces the direct maternal line the same way. These tests are useful for confirming specific ancestral claims. If you think you're descended from the priestly line, if your surname is Cohen or Katz, you can take a Y DNA test and check for the Cohen modal haplotype, a set of genetic markers that appears in about 45% of Ashkenazi men with Cohen surnames, and about 56% of Sephardic men with Cohen surnames. Not a guarantee, not proof, but a strong probabilistic signal that the family tradition is real. Same with Levite lines. Y-DNA studies have identified markers associated with Levite ancestry. If you've got a Levite surname and you test positive for the markers, you've got genetic corroboration of the family claim. But these tests only trace one line. Y-DNA traces the patriline. If your great-grandmother was Jewish but she married a non-Jewish man and your family took his surname, Y-DNA won't show it. Mitochondrial DNA traces the matriline. If your great-grandfather was Jewish, but your great-grandmother wasn't, mtDNA won't show it. So the verification protocol is triangulation. You need at least two of the following three: a surname that suggests Jewish ancestry, archival documentation that confirms Jewish identity, and genetic testing that corroborates the ethnic background. Surname alone, hypothesis. Surname plus archives, strong evidence. Surname plus DNA, probable. Archives plus DNA, confirmed. All three, case closed. But even then, you run into edge cases that break the model. Adoption. A child adopted into a Jewish family takes the family's surname but doesn't inherit the genetic markers. A child adopted out of a Jewish family loses the surname but keeps the genetics. You test positive for Ashkenazi ancestry. You search the archives and you find nothing, because your biological great-grandparents aren't the people whose surname you're carrying. Name changes during the Holocaust. Families who went into hiding took false identities. Polish Catholic identities, Ukrainian Orthodox identities. They took new names, new papers, new life histories. Some of them survived the war and kept the false names permanently because going back to the Jewish name was dangerous. Their descendants carry surnames that have no connection to the family's actual ancestry. Converso ancestry. Sephardic Jews who converted to Christianity under threat during the Spanish Inquisition kept their Iberian surnames but lost their religious identity. Their descendants are genetically Jewish but culturally Christian and have been for 500 years. DNA tests pick up the Sephardic markers. The surname gives no indication. The family has no memory of ever being Jewish. This is common in Latin America and the southwestern United States. Families named Martinez or Gonzalez or Hernandez who test positive for Sephardic DNA and have no explanation for it until they start digging into Inquisition records and find ancestors who were tried for secretly practicing Judaism in 1590. Children of rape during pogroms. Jewish women assaulted by Cossacks or soldiers during the waves of violence in Eastern Europe. The children born from those assaults carried their mother's surnames but had mixed ancestry. Genetically half Jewish, culturally Jewish if the mother raised them in the community, but the paternal line is blank. No Jewish surname, no paternal documentation, just a gap in the family story. Illegitimate children. A child born out of wedlock takes the mother's surname. If the mother was Jewish, the child is halakhically Jewish regardless of the father's identity. But if the surname is the father's and the father wasn't Jewish, you've got a Jewish child with a non-Jewish name. The archives might not record the father's identity. The birth certificate might list him as unknown. You're left with a genetic signal and no documentary path, so the algorithm fails. The distinctive Jewish names list fails. The surname-based identification system that corporations and researchers rely on fails. It works as a demographic tool for macro-level population estimates. It works for targeting ads and stocking grocery stores, but it doesn't work for individuals. It doesn't work for families. It doesn't work for anyone whose ancestors navigated the last 2 centuries of European Jewish history with anything other than perfect surname stability. And that's most people. The 29 name list captures 15 to 20% of American Jews. The rest of us are statistical ghosts. We're the descendants of name changers, of assimilators, of survivors who buried their identities to stay alive. We're grandchildren of Soviet Jews who became Ivanov, of German Jews who became Mueller, of American Jews who became Miller. We're the children of Sephardim and Mizrahim, who never had Ashkenazi surnames to begin with. We're invisible to the algorithm, but we're not invisible to history, because the archive remembers, the paper trail remembers, the DNA remembers. You just have to know where to look and what questions to ask. You have to stop trusting the surname as proof and start treating it as a clue, a breadcrumb. A starting point for a search that might take you to a synagogue metrical book in Vilnius, or a naturalization record in New York, or a genetic testing lab in California, or all 3 at once. The surname is the question, the archive is the answer, and the answer is almost never simple. Here's what the public's algorithm doesn't tell you. The list works because it finds the families who didn't have to run. The families who were stable enough, safe enough, privileged enough to keep their names across generations and borders. Those families exist. They're real, but they're not the whole story. They're not even most of the story. The rest of the story is written in the names that disappeared, in the gaps between census records, in the discrepancies between a birth certificate and a marriage license, in the moment when Rabinovich becomes Roberts and the archive goes quiet. That silence is data too. You want to find Jewish ancestry? Start with the surname. Search the databases. Run the DNA test. But don't stop when the algorithm says no, because the algorithm is looking for a specific kind of visibility, a specific kind of name, a specific kind of paper trail. If your family survived by erasing that trail, you have to dig deeper. You have to go to the town records, the immigration files, the naturalization papers, the cemetery plots. You have to cross-reference 3 different transliterations of the same name because the clerk at Ellis Island couldn't spell Cyrillic. You have to allow for the possibility that your great-grandfather lied on his draft card about where he was born because he was trying to avoid conscription. You have to triangulate between contradictory documents and figure out which one is closest to the truth. And sometimes the truth is that you'll never know. The records are gone, the witnesses are dead, the family story was lost 2 generations ago and nobody wrote it down. But the surname is still there, sitting in a database, waiting for someone to search for it. A probability marker, a statistical shadow. A name that meant something to someone once, even if nobody remembers what. That's the real story, not the 29 names on the list, the names that fell off the list, the names that were never on it to begin with, the names that were erased, translated, abandoned, forgotten, and are now floating in genealogical databases waiting for descendants who don't even know they should be looking. The algorithm finds 15% of us. The rest of us have to find ourselves.